Number like Samalola Yad some date legend is Shuayin, Taring Yetong is subshi, Davin Yates, and Yeshu Zosum, Resapasan gaining today. Taring Belgium guess a parcel to Sukshin B. Geji, Pudun Gabjo Solbe, Soxin Tingu, Unji Zuguto, Pende Sikyong Penpa Tsering Choki, Inge Nang Songshin Nawati, Shamla, Sikyong Show.
The 9th International Conference of Tibet Support Groups commences in Brussels, Belgium from 22nd to 25th February. Yesterday, the Speaker Khyentse Temple of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, Sikyong Penpa Tsering, and Kalu Nozuduma of the Department of Information and International Relations arrived at Brussels Airport and were warmly welcomed by the Tibetan community led by Representative Rinzhi Chuden Genkang and Secretary Tile Wangdu from the Office of Tibet Brussels and Pandit Tsering, President of Belgium Tibetan Community. In the evening, the Central Tibetan Administration hosted a dinner reception to welcome the participants of the 9th International Conference of Tibet Support Groups at Thon Hotel, Brussels City Centre in Belgium. The conference opened this morning with a welcome address by Mekula Speksa, President of Tibet Interest Group, European Parliament, followed by a message from His Holiness the Dalai Lama was read out by Kalu Nozuduma of Department of Information and International Relations of Central Tibetan Administration, video message by Ms. Heidi Hotela, Vice President of European Parliament, an inaugural address by Dr. Hans-Gert Pöttering, former President of European Parliament, and finally, keynote address by Sikyong Penpa Tsering of the Central Tibetan Administration.
Sikyong, President of the Central Tibetan Administration, to deliver the keynote address.
This is shaking, it doesn't. Shaking all the time. Okay. I want to thank. Did we do something wrong? Okay. Yeah, this is much better. Thank you. I want to thank Professor Hans-Gert Pöttering for gracing this conference of Tibet Support Group. His leadership and his dedication to the Tibetan cause, which he himself talked about, is worth the remembering by the Tibetans, because we went through a lot of difficulties during those times, particularly during the Olympics, when you were one of the few lone voices going against the Chinese government. And I would assume there are not many people who understood China as much as you did at an early stage. Even now, when we travel around the world, we find that we have to educate a lot of countries on the real intentions and motivations of China, which we continue to do so. Since I took over, we visited about 24 different countries in the last 2 years. There are many countries who have no idea of what China is doing. Therefore, your leadership is very much valued. Thank you very much for your visit to Dharamsala. Unfortunately, I was traveling around that time. Our Minister for Information and International Relations was also traveling, so you had the opportunity to meet with our speaker after your audience with His Holiness. And I also want to thank Mekula Speksa as the President of the Tibet Intergroup in the European Parliament for hosting this conference along with the International Campaign for Tibet Brussels. Mekula, of course, coming from Czech Republic, I had the honor of meeting their former president for a brief while at the Forum 2000, and we also had the opportunity to meet with all your leadership in the Senate and the House, who were very, very warm in welcoming us. It's not just myself, but also our Minister for Information and International Relations and others who are concerned about Tibet. And Czech was also host to many conferences that were held in the last 1 year. As we speak, just last night, we had the opportunity to meet with Jens your Pelevsky, or the Foreign Minister. I had the opportunity to meet him in Washington, D.C. for a short while, and our Minister of Information and International Relations also met him last year. So our relation with Czech Republic goes way back after Czech gained independence, and when His Holiness was the first person to be invited to Czech Republic as an honored guest after their independence. And I also want to thank the International Campaign for Tibet for co-hosting this organization. Mr. Wongpo Jantong is represented here. And many of you have come from long distances, our friends from New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Taiwan, and then from Latin America, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, some of the countries that I visited last year. And then, of course, all the representatives from Europe, South Asia, our host countries, India, Nepal. Of course, most of the representatives are all from from the free world, not so many from countries that are authoritarian, but we also have representatives from Russia. And I also want to thank Dolkun and our friends from Hong Kong for being part of this conference to talk about the challenges they face and how we can, in the future, work together. So at this point of time, I just want to focus on what our policy is and what our strategy is at this point of time. Since we took over in May 2021 as the Sikyong, we are fully committed to follow His Holiness Dalai Lama's wisdom, whether it's to do with politics or whether it's to do with welfare of the Tibetans in exile. So His Holiness is fully committed to the middle way policy, avoiding extreme polarities. In this case, the one polarity is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, and the other polarity is the present situation of Tibet under the repressive Chinese government. This policy remains the same, and His Holiness in his message today also talked about the universal values and his commitments. And he also talked about the importance of Buddhist culture that has the potential to spread more peace in this world. His Holiness also talked about the environmental importance of Tibet, that is not only important only to the Tibetans, but for the whole region and globally. But in addition to that, we talk about the middle way, our new strategy to focus on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. Because if there is no recognition for the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, then there is no leverage for middle way. Because every country keeps saying Tibet is part of China, whereas we would like these countries to call Tibet an occupied country. Then every country, when they say that, now in the last 2 years, I said I've been visiting so many different countries and meeting with a lot of foreign ministries, and we keep telling them that if you keep repeating this statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then you are going against international law. Because whether it happened to Tibet 70 years ago or whether it's happening to Ukraine today, it's the same international law after the formation of United Nations and the definition of modern state today. And the second thing we tell the international community is that, on the one hand, international community keeps parroting what Chinese government want them to say, that Tibet is part of PRC. And on the other hand, they say that they support negotiations between His Holiness Dalai Lama or representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. So we tell them these two don't go together, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand, and the whole international community keeps repeating what China wants them to say, basically parroting, not reading or understanding Tibet's history. Then the third thing we tell, then there is no reason for China to come and talk to us. If there is no historical recognition of Tibet as an independent state, and while the whole international community keeps repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? The whole international community is removing the very basis for negotiation. And the third point we make is, why is China not asking other countries to say that other regions are part of China, but why only Tibet is part of China? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. And they are trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. As we hear about their statements in the United Nations and all that, they keep saying no country recognizes Tibet. Now, who made that happen? It's China, who forced every country to repeat what they want them to say. So we have to change that. So the reason for me to say this, or the CTA to take this position, is fourfold. Of course, one is the geopolitical importance of Tibet. And when we talk about the geopolitical importance of Tibet, it also talks about Tibet's history. And I have 4 reasons why we talk about Tibet's history. One is to send a message to the Chinese government that you cannot change Tibet's history. History is in the past. It has to be determined by historians. That is why when His Holiness was put forward with this precondition that His Holiness should say that Tibet is part of China, His Holiness said, I'm not a historian. Let's leave history to historians. What matters through the middle way policy is to find a peaceful solution for the Tibetan people. So China cannot alter history. History cannot be rewritten. It has to be studied by historians, and historians should come out with a correct statement. So these days when I travel around, I carry Michael Van Praag's book, Tibet Brief 2020, and a Chinese professor who had written a rebuke to China's claim on Tibet. And it's coming from a Chinese, not a Tibetan or an international expert. So Michael, being an expert on international law, has worked with more than 100 scholars from around in Asia, not just Tibet, and came out with the conclusion that whether it's Tibet-Yuan relation or Tibet-Ming relation or Tibet-Qing relation, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. And Professor Lau, being a Chinese, he used to say that he used to be intrigued by this question as to why Chinese government is asking every other country to say Tibet is part of China, if Tibet had already been part of China. So that prompted him to do this study. And all the materials that he collected were from the website of the Chinese Communist Party, from the Yuan to the Qing, to the Ming, to the Qing. And he categorically proves that imperial China, if you can consider the Yuan, the Mongols, and the Ming, Qings, the Manchus as Chinese, then imperial China has never considered Tibet as part of China. So with these 2 books, I asked the foreign ministries to read Tibetan history, then take a position as to why or how we should act. So these are the 2 books. If you have not, I'm sure many of you have read these 2 books. If you have not read, please do. As Tibet supporters, you will have to reach out to governments and tell them what Tibetan history is all about. So you have Tibet Brief 2020 in the English version. And Professor Lau's book is in Chinese right now. Another 2-3 months, the English version will also come out. And these 2 are powerful tools because these have come out in the recent times. It was not done in the 60s or 70s where you don't have too much access to reference materials. And many of the official government records have also been declassified, so there are many more sources compared to what was there before. So this, I want to set the tone for the working groups to follow, because this is the official position of the Central Tibetan Administration. And if we have to achieve something, then we have to achieve in concert with each other, in cooperation with each other, putting all our resources together, because there's no time to step back. The only way is to move forward, whether you follow independence or whether you follow autonomy. And the third reason why I talk about history is for the Tibetan youngsters to study Tibetan. If Tibetans don't study Tibetan history, no one else will, apart from Tibet supporters or perhaps some scholars who want to study Tibetan history. And the fourth reason why we talk about Tibetan history is also because we have independence advocates, we have middle way advocates within the Tibetan community, and there's no reason to fight amongst ourselves or argue amongst ourselves. For independence seekers, it is very important that you have to prove Tibet's independence if you want to seek future independence for Tibet. And middle way is the official position of the Central Tibetan administration. I just want to stress for those who are not in the know that to change the middle way policy, we have to follow a certain process. It's not just that I got elected as Sikyong and I can change the policy just like that. There has to be a process of referendum, and it'll be a very public process, not just something that will be done behind the scenes. So keeping these in mind, I see no reason why we cannot all work together. And I also want to stress that at this conference, you can see a generational shift in the Tibetan movement. Now you can see a lot of younger generations of Tibetans who have taken over the leadership of the Tibetan associations. As you know, wherever we have a sizable number of Tibetans, we have Tibetan associations. Today in this conference, presidents of most of these Tibetan associations are represented. And then we have also floated this platform called the Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group, meant for all Tibetans, but particularly for younger generations of Tibetans to take the mantle of leadership. And it's our responsibility, our generation's responsibility, to make sure that the younger generations of Tibetans are well equipped to take on the responsibility. As Tibetans say, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And Professor Hans-Gert Pöttering mentioned about his meeting with His Holiness and His Holiness' commitment to live long. And he keeps repeating this to us as well. And in the last many public gatherings, His Holiness always said that I'll live for more than 2 decades, I'll live up to 113 years of age. So I keep telling our Chinese friends, you're waiting for the 14th Dalai Lama to die. And this message is for you. Now we will see whether Communist Party will outlive the His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or whether His Holiness the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party. Thank you.
Thank you, Sikyong. I would